It's Pam again, and welcome back to Playing with Pam. In today's video, what I want to demonstrate is how you make a small square into a larger square. In other words, if you find a t-shirt that is too small to cut out, say a 15.5-inch block from, but you really like the design, what do? And basically what you're going to do is you're going to cut out the part of the t-shirt that you do like, and then you're going to find another t-shirt, like the back of a t-shirt, a part that you would just normally throw out, and you're going to cut the strips out of that and attach them to the smaller square to then enlarge the block so that it will be big enough to fit in to the overall quilt without having to mess with different size blocks. So I have a few examples here on my table. You may recall this particular t-shirt was a really teeny tiny t-shirt, but I really liked the design on it. I particularly liked the design on the back, but then I was kind of convinced that I sort of liked the design on the front. So I ended up cutting out the front and the back, pieces from the front and the back, but even together, those were not big enough for a 15.5-inch square. But even if they were, I thought it would be more fun to make it a little bit more colorful. And so then what I did is I found the back of another t-shirt. I used the front of the second t-shirt, but I was just going to throw out the back of it. And I decided to cut that into strips, and I'm going to ultimately create one 15.5-inch block. Obviously right now this looks much bigger than 15.5 inches, and it is, but once I sew the seams and whatnot, it will turn out to just be a single 15.5-inch block. This one's kind of complicated, and you can try something like this later on, but I would suggest that maybe you start with something more simple. For instance, something like this. Again, this inner part was from a t-shirt that was too small to create a 15.5-inch block, but I still really like the design. So went and found some backs that I wasn't going to be using and cut up the strips and ended up sewing them together. So again, I ended up with a 15.5-inch block. And of course, you don't necessarily have to cut up the backs. You could cut up the fronts if you chose the design to use the design on the back of a t-shirt. Just the back or the front is arbitrary. It's just that typically the designs that we want are on the front. And today, what I'm going to use as my demonstration block is this one, which again, small t-shirt, but I was able to get about a 12.5-inch block from. So this is going to be my main block. And then what I found was a white t-shirt, actually, that just a plain white t-shirt I've cut out. I'm going to actually use the front of this t-shirt for a different t-shirt quilt, but I've saved the back of it, and I went ahead and ironed on my fusible interfacing on the back, because again, even though these are strips that are going around the sides of the main block, I still want them to have fusible facing as well. So I went ahead and ironed it onto this, and now the next thing I'm going to do is cut my strips. So that's what I'm going to show you how to do next. So I take it over here to my cutting board, and again, I just want to show you, so this is my 15.5-inch ruler, and you can see this block is about 2 inches too short or too small all the way around. So I'm going to cast that one aside, and I have another ruler here, just to make it a little easier for me to cut. And I'm actually going to turn my cutting board around so I have the tall part up. And you don't have to make, in fact, I would suggest you not make the strips the exact length and width that you need initially. It's better to make them slightly larger, and then we can trim when we get all finished putting all the strips on. Sorry, I have a little wrinkle in this, or maybe there's something underneath there. Nope. Yep, there's a little piece there. Okay. So first I'm going to square, or to just make a straight line on my t-shirt. I'm going to cut up just so I have a guide. It doesn't have to be perfect, it just has to be good enough. again, as I told you earlier, I already measured, and I want my strips to be about 2.5 inches wide, and I think I want to cut them, so if my block has to be 15.5 inches, the longest side has to obviously be more than 15.5 inches. The smallest it could be would be 16, because I'm going to have 3/4 inch sleeves, or I'm sorry, sleeves, 3/4 inch seams. So I'm going to just go ahead and cut the entire length of this, which I think is about 20 inches or something like that. So I'm cutting right now 2.5 inch strips. Again, they're a little bit wider than I'm going to ultimately need, but that just gives me a little bit of play space just in case, you know, any of my sewing seams or whatever are a little bit off, or it doesn't iron out perfectly flat. It just makes it a lot easier for me to not have to worry about that. Okay, so I'm actually going to iron. I didn't iron this down enough because this was at the very bottom of the section I was going to use. So let me just make sure that this fusible interfacing is down firmly on this piece. Okay, and now what I want to do is I'm going to take my pieces, and first thing you're going to do is you're going to put a piece on the top and the bottom of this. So what you do is you put it face sides together, and you can really, since this is, I have so much more the strip is so much longer than I actually need, I'm just going to lay it up there on the edge, and I will pin it. I'm going to use my t-shirt, the t-shirt square, as a guide, since my strip is a little bit longer than I'm going to actually need. I'll use that as my guide. And I like to use quite a few pins so that I make sure my material doesn't move around. And I'll go ahead and pin the other side. And I'm going to use 1/4 inch seam, so a standard quilting seam, when I add these edging pieces on it. When we actually sew the quilt together, we're going to use 1/2 inch seams. And I think that has just become a standard for these t-shirt quilts, because it just gives you a little bit more room in case you don't catch, I guess, a side or whatever. You could probably get away with 1/4 inch seams, but the standard is using 1/2 inch seams. But for this, I'm going to be just using 1/4 inch seam. So we're just going to attach them now. Do make sure you use a blocking stitch when you start and when you finish. And of course, remember to pull out those pins. Now, one thing I just noticed I didn't do was change my thread. I was just working on a darker colored square before, and so I still had the dark colored thread in here, but I don't think it should make much difference. One of the squares, the main square anywhere is dark, it's just that the outside is white. So basically, you can see what we're working on here, and the next thing we want to do is we want to iron the seams before we do the cutting, because we want to make sure everything's flat. And when I do my pressing, I like, instead of opening up the seam like you might and when you do a regular sewing project, you might open it up. But when you quilt, and in the these t-shirt quilts, I typically just like to press the seam in one direction. So that's what I'm going to do next. Okay, so now I have my two edges that are attached, and now what I'm going to do is trim off the sides, so it will be exactly square. So I could either take that 15.5-inch square ruler and use that, or this one, I have another ruler here that just happens to be right here, so I will use that. And again, you're just trimming off the sides, not worrying about the width just yet. We'll worry about that later. Okay, so now we know we have enough on the top of the bottom. We have more than enough, actually. We'll trim that up in a minute. And so now what we want to do is we want to put on the other side pieces. And by the way, you may have a block that you cut out, instead of a square, you cut it out longer, and then you only need to put pieces on maybe the sides to make it to the full 15.5-inch. You don't have to put pieces all the way around. It's kind of whatever you want to do. All right, so then I'm going to take my next two strips, and again, front sides together, and I'm going to just pin it on to the existing square. All right, so now it's all pinned up, and I'm going to go ahead and sew it. Okay, so we have got all four sides on the square, and right now it looks like this. I'm going to go take it over to the iron and press open those seams. And I do want to show you one other thing when you are pressing your seams. So you see I've already pressed this top one up and the bottom one down. So for these side ones, I'm going to press them away as opposed to towards the center, and that's because if I were to press them towards the center right here and wherever they met on the corners with the other seams, there'd be a big bump, and you want to keep this as little bulk as you can. So if you press it open, you have a little bit less bulk. So let's go over and press open the seams, and then we'll trim the edges off, and we'll trim up the block, and we'll be all set. All right, so now we've got this beautiful block, and well, it doesn't look quite beautiful yet. I'm going to go ahead now and trim it up. So I actually don't even need to trim off the ears separately, because I can just do it all at once now. So I have my ruler. I'm going to place it down on the quilt block, making sure I line up the center block as well as I can. Doesn't have to be perfect, but it should be pretty good. All right, so mine looks pretty nice. And again, the beauty of having a grid on your template is I just can't underestimate or overestimate. Well, anyway, it's great to have. So I'm going to go ahead and now trim it up. Okay, so we are done. This is it. This is the finished block. It's 15.5 inches now. I was able to use that smaller t-shirt, and I actually think it probably looks a little bit more interesting with the border around it, so that's great. All right, so thank you for joining me for this particular segment, and I'll leave you to going ahead and finishing up your blocks, and we'll meet again after I guess I'm all done, I'll show you how to fit them together into the quilt, and then we will sew our blocks together. It's pretty exciting. All right guys, thank you so much for joining me, and I will see you soon.